Hi, welcome or welcome back to my channel. Today, I want to talk about Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. I promised in my last video that I'll do a review on this one after I finish reading, so here we are. So this is a Western epic, but to be honest, I am not a big fan of Westerns because stories about cowboys and dusty plains just feel far from my world, and they're often too violent or macho for my taste. But to my surprise, I absolutely loved Lonesome Dove. And I think this book is so much more than its genre. Yes, it has cattle drive, saloons, and shootouts, but there's also something deeper, like something philosophical and even existential. And as I later found out, McMurtry didn't really see Lonesome Dove as a celebration of Western mythology, and in fact, he saw it as a critique of it. And that actually cleared up some of the questions I had while reading, and it also gave me a new lens of understanding the book. So what's the book about? Well, Lonesome Dove is the name of a dusty border town in Texas, and that's where the story begins. It's set in the late 1870s, about a decade after the end of the American Civil War. It centers on two retired Texas Rangers, Augustus McCrae and Woodrow Call, who were once legendary for their exploits on the frontier. But now with the Indian Wars mostly over and the West changing, they run a small outfit called the Hat Creek Cattle Company. And they are joined by a small crew like Dietz and P.I., who are also farmer rangers, Bolivar, an ex-Mexican bandit who somehow ended up ringing the dinner bell at Hat Creek, and Newt, who is a teenage boy who is actually Call's son, although Call never acknowledges him. So life is slow, it's a bit rough at Lonesome Dove, but things begin to change when their old comrade Jake Spoon rides into town. He is on the run after accidentally killing a man, and he casually mentions that Montana is wide open and full of opportunity. And that offhand comment is enough to ignite something in Call, and he decides to organize a cattle drive north. So at his insistence, the Hat Creek outfit sets off on this long, dangerous journey across the American West. And of course, more folks join the ride, like Lorena, a prostitute in town, comes along as she hopes to escape her past. And there is Dush, a cowboy, hopelessly in love with her. And there's Lippy Jones, the piano player at the local saloon. And there are two young Irishmen fresh off the boat, hoping to find a better life in America and somehow swept into this grueling journey. And also Call recruits some local boys who are eager but green, and they see the cattle drive as an adventure, although they have no idea what they're really in for. At its heart, this is a road story. Like, they meet all sorts of people, they face every kind of hardship, like droughts, storms, ambushes, and not everyone makes it to the end. I think in a way it reminded me of Journey to the West, because both stories follow a group of travelers who face all sorts of challenges along the way, but they're also very different because in Journey to the West, the monk Xuanzang and his companions have a clear mission. They want to fetch the Buddhist scriptures for enlightenment, and they know what they are after, and they succeed. But in Lonesome Dove, people don't really seem to have a clear goal. The cattle drive is Call's idea, but it feels more like a search for a purpose than a pursuit for any real goal. And most of the men don't even know why they are going, and by the end, it's hard to say that they achieved any success. So it's not really about triumph, it's about endurance. So why do they go to Montana? That question actually hangs over the journey, especially as they lose more and more people along the way. And I think at one point, Augustus says they're going simply because that's where they started for. And he says he and Call have always wanted to get where they started for. even if it doesn't make any sense. So they go because they are already going. But I think it's more than that. I think it's about their life philosophy, about their own definition of what makes a good life. Because this is the late 1870s when the American West is changing fast, and the wild, lawless frontier where men like Gus and Call once made their names is vanishing. The Indian wars are mostly over, railroads are being pushed westward, towns are springing up, law and order are taking hold. So for men who had spent their lives on the edge of civilization, the world is just going without them. So I feel that going to Montana is, in a way, an attempt, at least for Call, to find a new frontier. It's not really about building a cattle empire, it's about holding on to a way of life that is vanishing, even if it doesn't make any sense. Here's a quote that I think captures Call's mindset. For years, Call had looked at life as if it were essentially over. Call had never been a man who could think of much reason for acting happy, but then he had always been one who knew his purpose. His purpose was to get done what needed to be done, and what needed to be done was simple, if not easy. The settlers of Texas needed protection from Indians on the north and bandits on the south. As a ranger, Call had had a job that fit him, and he had gone about the work with a vigor that would have passed for happiness in another man. But the job wore out. So for Call, life is about duty, endurance, and getting the job done. As McMurtry notes in the preface, he is a Stoic. He doesn't need joy or comfort. He needs a task. And that Stoic mindset shapes not only how he lives, but also how he handles emotions. Like he believes in controlling his feelings, approaching the world with logic, and holding himself to rigid ethical standards. And that is part of why he cannot bring himself to acknowledge Newt as his son. Everyone in the Hat Creek outfit knows Newt is his son, and they all wanted him to do the right thing, but he never does. And it is not because he doesn't care, it's because acknowledging Newt would mean facing a part of himself he spent years trying to ignore. Because Newt is the son of Maggie, who is a prostitute that Call once had a relationship with. But instead of facing what the relationship meant or facing Maggie himself, Call just walked away. And Maggie died without ever seeing him again. And Call tries to erase that part of his life, to bury it under duty and self-restraint. But Newt is like a living reminder of that past. Admitting he is Newt's father would mean admitting that he once gave in to vulnerability, to emotion, to human connection, or to something that is beyond control. But Gus, on the other hand, is an Epicurean. He enjoys life's simple pleasures like whiskey, women, cars, and he values human connection. He joins the cattle drive not to chase some grand mission. He goes because he hopes to stop at where his old lover Clara lives. And he goes also because of Call, because Call is his oldest friend, and he is going. But also I think maybe after years of dusty routine in Lonesome Dove, he is simply ready for something new, something unpredictable. I think he's willing to embrace whatever life throws his way, because he often says life is a twisting stream. So Gus and Call are opposite in many ways, but I think they also desperately need each other. They complement one another, and that is what makes their relationship so compelling. And I think in a way, the cattle drive isn't just about getting to Montana. It's also about each man confronting a part of himself he's long ignored. It is true that they represent two different worldviews, but the journey kind of forces each of them to stretch toward the other side. Because like Gus, for all his charm and love for pleasure, proves time and again that he has a stoic backbone because he faces danger without hesitation. He endures brutal conditions, and he meets death with calm dignity. And Carl has built his life around duty and emotional restraint. But as the journey drags on and they begin to lose people, I think something starts to shift in him. He doesn't change overnight, of course, but I think he starts to see that there's more to life than just getting the job done. And there's this unspoken love he carries for Gus, and there's this bond with Newt that he still cannot bring himself to acknowledge, but I think we can feel that something in him is breaking open. So yes, the cattle drive may be futile in the practical sense because they don't build the empire Carl dreamed of, but it becomes a kind of inward journey, one that tests, reshapes, and ultimately reveals who they really are. And maybe that is what life is, because it's not just about what we build, it's also about how we are shaped by what we go through. But still, I'm thinking, was it all worth it? The cattle drive costs them almost everything. Friends, family, and even their sense of purpose. And it ends in death, in disillusionment, and in solitude. And in many ways, the cattle drive reflects the old idea of manifest destiny, the belief that Americans had this divine right to expand westward no matter the cost. And this belief justified the conquest and settlement, and it framed expansion as heroic. But in Lonesome Dove, that expansion isn't heroic at all. It is brutal, it is tragic, and it is kind of pointless. This journey doesn't bring prosperity. It brings loss, it brings loneliness, and the painful realization that the world is changing and the old ways are dying. And I think that is exactly the point, because McMurtry made it very clear in interviews that he wanted to challenge the romantic myths of the American West. He was dismantling the cowboy legend and revealing the emptiness and cost beneath the often romanticized myth of the frontier. And I think it's also worth noticing how Native Americans are depicted in this novel, because many of them, especially characters like Blue Duck, are portrayed as violent and savage. But I think Gus says at one point, they didn't invite us here. And he also says, the Indians have had this land forever. To them, it is precious because it's old. To us, it's exciting because it's new. So I think that's like a reminder that the so-called frontier wasn't empty. It was already someone else's home. And at least Gus seems to understand the injustice and arrogance that underpinned this westward expansion. Finally, I want to talk about the Black and female characters in Lonesome Dove, because in most Westerns, they are often sidelined or stereotyped. But here, they are some of the most compelling figures in the story. And in fact, I'd say that two of the characters who best balance Stoicism and Epicureanism are Dietz and Clara. Dietz is a Black scout, and he's perhaps the most respected and capable member of the Hat Creek outfit. He is calm under pressure. He always gets the job done. But he also has a poetic soul. Like, he wonders about nature, he dreams of the moon, and even when he is dying, he's thinking of the moon at home. It would have been so much better to stay where they had lived, by the old river. Dietz felt a longing to be back, to sit in the corrals at night and wonder about the moon. Many a time he had dozed off, wondering about the moon, whether the Indians had managed to get on it. Sometimes he dreamed he was on it himself, a foolish dream, but the thought made him sleepy. And after he dies, Gus honors him by carving his full name into a wooden grave marker. And it says, Joshua Dietz served with me 30 years, fought in 21 engagements with the Comanche and Kiowa, cheerful in all weathers, never shirked a task. Splendid behavior. I mean, a name matters a lot because it's a form of dignity and recognition. And I think Maggie, who is Newt's mother, once asked Carl, Can you just say my name? Can you just say it once? Because like in a society that often denies people like Maggie and Deets a voice, a name is like everything. It kind of says, I see you, you mattered. Then there is Clara, who is perhaps my favorite character in the whole book. She appears quite late in the story, but she's tied to many of the key figures like Gus, Jake, Lorena, and even July Johnson, this sheriff who sets out chasing Jake, but ends up searching for his runaway wife. And that wife, Elmira, actually gives birth to his son at Clara's home. So in many ways, she is a very important figure in the novel. And she's such a powerful woman. She's endured life's hardest blows. Her parents were killed. All three of her sons died in childhood. And her husband is now paralyzed and dying. Yet she survives, and not just survives, she thrives. She runs her horse farm, she raises her daughters, she nurses her husband, and she still finds pleasure in books, in flowers, and in sunrise. And she even dreams of becoming a writer. So I think she strikes a perfect balance between Stoicism and Epicureanism. She has a life attitude that is both pragmatic and poetic. And I think more importantly, she is a woman with great agency because she doesn't wait for a man to rescue her. She rescues herself. And I think she also has a profound impact on Lorena because Lorena used to, she used to be someone constantly waiting for a man to save her. And she's repeatedly hurt by that. But when Clara invites her to stay, something changes. Lorena has her own room, a room she doesn't have to share with any man. And in that space, she begins to understand what she really needs. Lorena found that she didn't think about Gus all that much. She was glad she stayed at Clara's. For almost the first time in her life, she had a decent bed in a clean room and tasteful meals and people around who were kind to her. She liked having a whole room to herself, alone. Of course, she had had a room in Lonesome Dove, but it hadn't been the same. Men could come into that room. Letting them in was a condition of having it. But she didn't have to let anyone into her room in Clara's house. Well, that's pretty much all I wanted to share about Lonesome Dove. And of course, there are so many other characters that are all interesting to explore. I definitely loved the ending, though I won't spoil it here. I honestly think it's well worth reading, even if, like me, you are not a Western fan. And if you read it, I'd love to hear your thoughts, like who's your favorite character or which moment hit you the hardest. So that's it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.